Today, we're talking about mindful eating and how overused that word is, and how many misconceptions and baggage that word comes with. So, we'll go over how to eat mindfully near the end. But mindful eating is taken so out of context that for most people, it's an entirely useless concept. And what I mean by that is very simple. Who in the world is going to spend 10 to 15 minutes chewing their food very slowly on a regular basis? I mean, it's great to be mindful on a retreat and to do an occasional meal in silence and just really absorb your food. Maybe for an exercise, you just really taste your food. It's great. But actually making it a habit, actually eating mindfully for 10 minutes a meal, for so many people, the misconception is that it's all or nothing. That you got to do every bit of mindfulness, you got to slow down every one of your meals, you got to eat slowly, yada yada yada. And it's just not true. Because the mindsets, the context in which mindful eating is extremely useful to stop emotional eating, to stop binge eating, to make peace with food, all these different things. The context is really, really important, and that's what we're going to talk about. The context of mindful eating and why we can make it practical is stopping automatic eating, stopping the disconnect. And you don't need 10 minutes to stop a disconnect. And by disconnect, I mean oftentimes when you emotionally eat, when you binge eat, it's either a chaotic state or it's a zoned out state where you're kind of stressed out and you're not really paying attention to what you're eating. You're just eating. And so in both cases, that's a disconnected state where you're using food to cope with emotions, using food to numb emotions, using food to disconnect. And mindfulness is about connection. You don't need 10 minutes of connection. You just need a little spark. So one very, very achievable mindset I like to give people in the beginning is, hey, realizing that this isn't about mindfulness for the sake of mindfulness. Like, that's great. But it's much more powerful and relevant if we are mindful to connect with our food, to get out of the automatic pilot. That's our enemy right here. Our enemy is being triggered by a routine, by a cue, and then going through an automatic routine. So mindfulness and its instructions to taste, to slow down, to feel your body as you eat, to maybe even notice how it looks, to put your phone down, to smell it, that can take a minute. It doesn't need to take 10 minutes. There are some great mindfulness tips on how to connect with your food, which I just covered. Smell, all the senses, eyes, taste, touch, texture in your mouth, chewing slowly, putting down the phone. Great. But if you're just doing those for the sake of doing those, I personally have found, and teaching other people too, it doesn't click deep enough. It's like, oh yeah, that's great, that sounds great. And then a few days go by and no one's eating mindfully anymore. But when people are thinking about it in terms of beating emotional eating, stopping the disconnect, now we're onto something. Now we're onto something more relevant. And the key thing is too, you only have to practice this like once a day, maybe once a meal. Just first thing when you sit down, actually notice how your food tastes. Isn't that like a revolutionary concept? It's kind of sad that it is, but we're so distracted these days with phones and work and emails and we're rushing that we sometimes don't even taste the food. This is about tasting your food. This is about tasting your food. This is not some fluffy monk concept. This is not like a impractical thing. We want you to taste your food. That's it. That's it. It's a win-win situation because I mean, if there's anything we can all agree on, it's that you need to taste your food, right? I mean, you need to taste your food. The funny thing is that tasting your food cuts right to the heart of binge and emotional eating because it's something we all agree on. And even when you're emotionally eating, even when you know you're using food to cope with emotion, you still want to taste the food. No one ever has told me that they're eating food and don't want to taste the food. Normally people are eating food out of autopilot. They're using it to numb, but they're in this weird disconnected state where they're not very present. But if you ask them, do you want to actually taste the food when you're eating? They'll say, yeah. They want to taste it. I mean, some of these foods are the foods, when you binge, it's the food that you secretly want. And emotional eating can sometimes be a comfort food. Usually these foods have a default, I'm going to come back to this word default in a little bit, but they usually have a default association of tasting good. So the key mindset, and this is really powerful, you might as well enjoy it. That's what mindful eating is all about. You might as well enjoy it. You're eating the food anyways. You're at work and you're having a normal meal, you're binging, you're emotionally eating, you're just snacking. You might as well taste it. You might as well enjoy it. It's a win-win situation. We're not talking something that it's 10 minutes of silence. We're talking a few bites. Notice how it tastes. You want to do that. You want to do that, right? You might as well enjoy it. It's something that reminds people of something they already know to be true, that food is meant to be tasted. And yes, you can take an additional step and we'll say explore the textures, eat slow, savor, enjoy your food. That's great too, but you might not have time for it. That's okay. But once a day, twice a day, every meal, check in with the taste. It's something that's just so natural. And by checking in with the taste, you're automatically going to connect to the experience. And that is going to, over time, especially when you practice it every meal or once a day, just a few mindful bites, that habit is going to contribute to less emotional eating, less binge eating, and so forth. Now, coming back to that word default, we need to be prepared for something that's a little saddening in some ways, because when we become aware of the real reasons we eat food, oftentimes it's to disconnect. Like, there's a lot of benefit in disconnecting, right? We need to honor the power of disconnection. Like, we all need to take a break, okay? We all need to turn off our brains. Nothing wrong with that. There's a million different ways to turn off your brain. Watching movies, listening to music, going on a walk, not working. Eating is one of those ways. And for some people, that way is just relied upon too much. So when you start to be mindful and you're no longer using eating as a tool to numb, you're actually using eating as a tool to feel, what can happen is that you're no longer getting the benefit of disconnection. The food that you thought in your fantasy that you remembered as good, when you actually start to taste it, it doesn't taste that good. And this can be a little saddening. It can be a little underwhelming. It can be disappointing. And I just say this in advance because we need to expect that that's a natural phenomenon. That as you stop getting benefit of disconnection, and you stop getting the benefit of automatic pilot, you're gonna, if you're stressed out, you're gonna feel that stress more. And you'll also notice that the food doesn't taste as good. I put my hand on my heart instinctually as I spoke right here. I'm just realizing that. Because once you just start discovering that food doesn't taste as good, it's kind of some doors start to open up, but when the doors start to open up, it might be a little bit of scariness too. Like you realize the foods that you've been eating forever don't taste good. They don't satisfy you. And so it leads to this freedom that what does satisfy you. And that's the journey we want to go on. That's the journey that's worth going on. Like that's where mindful eating. It's really about an exploration about what foods do you like from a taste perspective. And in other lessons and other wisdom teachings on emotional eating and this whole eating enlightenment thing, we talk about studying and exploring how foods make you feel after you eat them. And that's really important too. But equally important is like the pleasure, trying to find out foods and combinations of foods that literally taste good to you. Like we want a mindset and a heart set where we receive joy, where we are trying to open ourselves up to receive more and more joy because we're worthy of it. And so this mindset of mindful eating is really done in the service of pleasure, of joy, of like emotional receiving. It's not, I repeat, it's not practical even when you're done doing it in a service of discipline. When you're just being mindful to be mindful, or when you're just putting down your phone to put down your phone. That can be great, don't get me wrong. I find it a little bit impractical, but you're welcome to practice eating foods mindfully, putting down your phone, eating slowly, and trying to make that a habit. But the emphasis on just tasting your food a few bites, trying to discover foods that actually taste good to you, being prepared to make peace and let go of the foods that don't actually taste good to you, and then going on a journey where you're really trying to, this goes beyond eating. This is a stance towards life, right? This is like, you gotta turn your heart set, your mindset to receive joy in life. Like that's what this is about. This is like a microcosm teaching that's really about orienting you to connecting and discovering what makes you happy in life. That's what mindful eating is about. So let me know what you think of this video, and I'll see you soon. Peace.